Welcome, dear listeners, to the Carolina Haints Podcast, brought to you by Recap Productions and A Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Municipal buildings, like courthouses and city halls, are meant to represent the people. It's where elected officials make decisions, where judges pass judgment, and where citizenship takes action. Governments are supposed to reflect the people in representative democracy, but sometimes those reflections aren't so pretty. And sometimes the edifices we build to house the administration of governance hold dark and disturbing memories. Take, for example, the Asheville City Hall building. Asheville, North Carolina, was a rather undeveloped area until George Vanderbilt unveiled Biltmore Estate in 1895. The early years of the 1900s saw Asheville start to come into its own. By the 1920s, Asheville was spending millions on infrastructure, including a shiny new Art Deco City Hall that the City Council claimed would be the finest municipal building in the nation. Asheville City Hall was completed in 1928. In the early months of 1930, the city's finance manager jumped to his death from the roof of the building. And some would say, for good reason. The stock market crash of 1929 not only ushered in the Great Depression, but it also left the city of Asheville penniless. It took the city until 1976, nearly 50 years, to recover from their massive debt. And you think your credit cards are hard to pay off. While the city may have recovered, many believe that the finance manager is still at unrest. Witnesses report seeing a man wearing an old-fashioned suit and hat standing in line at the basement mess hall. The man is said to appear and disappear as he approaches the counter. Occasionally, employees will show up for work only to find that their work areas have been rummaged through, in complete disarray. Fearing that their offices had been broken into, the workers reported the events to police. When the security tapes were reviewed, law enforcement was at a loss. The tapes showed no one entered or exited the locked offices throughout the night. A bit northeast from Asheville, there's the Allegheny County Courthouse. No, not the famous one in Pittsburgh, the one in Sparta, North Carolina. The building was rebuilt in 1933 following the Big Fire of '32. The fire began in a raised lunchroom, presently known as the Sparta Restaurant, and destroyed several homes and businesses before it was brought under control. When everything was said and done, the original courthouse was just a shell of a building. Being the Depression, the new building lacked much of the grandeur of its predecessor. But what it lacks in style, it makes up for with odd occurrences. Although no one is known to have died in the courthouse during the fire, since its rebuilding, visitors report hearing whistles coming from the vicinity of the now long decommissioned prison cells. Also, disembodied footsteps can be heard on the staircases. But right next door to Allegheny County, hidden in the most northwest part of the state, Ashe County borders both Tennessee and Virginia. The county seat, Jefferson, North Carolina, was founded in 1799 and is home to just barely 1,500 residents. Despite its diminutive size, Jefferson boasts to be home to several paranormal events. Perhaps we'll dig deeper into Jefferson's history in a future podcast. But Jefferson also claims to be the first town in the country to be named after Thomas Jefferson, despite the fact that Jefferson, New Hampshire was incorporated a few years earlier. In 1904, the county built its first courthouse. The building was in use until the late 1990s, when the courthouse moved to a new location, leaving the old building abandoned. In 2010, after more than a decade of neglect, the building found new life as the Museum of Ashe County History. Every room in the building was restored except for the courtroom itself, which remains virtually untouched today. The courtroom is used for archive storage and is off limits to the general public. Museum officials say that while the building may seem calm from the outside, the interior is bustling with activity. Of course, they mean the dozens of rotating historical installations, like a scale replica of the Virginia Creeper. And while that seems like a pretty cool name for some sort of deranged serial killer, sadly it's not. The Virginia Creeper was a railroad that ran through the county for nearly 100 years and at one time delivered passengers to White Top, Virginia, the highest point for passenger service in the eastern United States. The museum is known as one of the best small museums in the state, but that doesn't make it immune to its fair share of strange occurrences. The activity seems to be centered around the old courtroom, where dragging footsteps have been heard while all those in the room were seated and remained still. Another witness reported that she heard one of the file cabinets open and the sound of rustling papers, as if someone were flipping through the files. Expecting a coworker, she peeked around the corner to see who was with her, only to find that she was all alone. Even the museum curator has admitted to an incident involving an intern who, alone in the building at the time, heard a telephone ring on the floor above him. He then heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking across the room to answer the phone. The museum plans to fully restore the courtroom soon and open it to the general public. It'll be interesting to see whether that curbs the ghostly sightings or amplifies them. The Caswell County Courthouse was constructed in 1861. The second-floor courtroom has been described as one of the most beautiful in the state. However, the Reconstruction years following the Civil War was a difficult one for much of the South. Chaos ruled. The economy was in ruins, cities demolished, and plantations destroyed. Add that to the reluctance of some to accept the new social standing of the African American community, and what you have is an extremely volatile situation. It was during those turbulent times that John Walter Stevens moved to Caswell County. Originally from Rockingham County, Stevens had a reputation as a thug. Although in 1866, I suppose they probably would have called him a ruffian. Anyway, John was known as Chicken Stevens, after he found two of the neighbors' chickens on his property and killed them. The police arrested him, but when he was released, he attacked the neighbor with a stick. When two bystanders attempted to assist the hurt man, Chicken shot him. He sold his mother's house without telling her and left the area. She finally tracked him down in Caswell County. A few weeks later, she was found in her room with her throat slit. Chicken Stevens was there at the time and told police that she had slipped and fallen on a cracked chamber pot. Stevens worked as an agent for the Freedmen's Bureau and was a member of the Republican-affiliated Union League. Through those channels, he helped control the black vote in Caswell County and was elected to the North Carolina State Senate in 1868. Any who opposed him found their barns and crops destroyed and their livestock dead. At the request of Stevens, Governor William Holden presented a bill allowing the removal of habeas corpus. The public was outraged, and in June of 1870, 8 members of the Ku Klux Klan killed Stevens in the Caswell County Courthouse. A year later, Governor Holden was the second United States governor to be impeached. All of that makes for a very good story and something the basis for a good ghost story. The only event ever reported at the Caswell County Courthouse is that the doors of the office where Chicken Stevens was killed are alleged to open and close on their own. Chicken Stevens has some competition when it comes to being a hated man in the community. Daniel Keith was not a very nice man. He was born in 1848 to a poor farming family in Pulaski County, Kentucky. When Dan was just 14, he ran away from home and joined the Confederate Army. He deserted after just a couple of months and then fled to Indiana. That's where his life of crime began, with petty theft. Then he came back to Kentucky and again joined the Confederate Army. And again deserted. Over the next 15 years, he conned and cheated his way through Kentucky, Tennessee, and both the Carolinas. He also married and abandoned 4 women. In 1878, he settled in North Carolina and launched his most elaborate con yet. He rubbed a large rock with brass until it resembled gold, and then sold the 68-pound nugget to a number of men in Rutherford County. Needless to say, Dan Keith didn't have very many friends, and the men he cheated wanted to kick his ass. But Dan was no lightweight at 6'4", 230 pounds. If they wanted to get him back, they'd have to find some other way to get their revenge. On January 28, 1880, many people believed that they found a way to do that. The 10-year-old body of Alice Ellis was found. The girl had been raped, and then someone used a rock to crush her skull. Of course, Dan Keith's reputation made him a suspect, and after Sheriff Walker received an anonymous tip saying that Dan had been seen at the girl's house, he was arrested. Some believe that Dan's enemies pressured the county to prosecute Dan for a crime that he did not commit. He was calm when the sheriff showed up at his house and did not resist arrest. He denied any knowledge of the girl's death. Deputies found a blood-soaked shirt in his house, which Dan explained had been from skinning rabbits earlier in the day. Despite Dan showing the carcasses, they immediately arrested him. But Dan smirked as the deputies led him out, confident that he would be found not guilty. The sheriff had him moved out of the county until the trial, after learning that a lynch mob had been formed. In the days leading up to the trial, Sheriff Walker interrogated him daily to try to get a confession, but Dan maintained that he had never killed anyone. It seemed that everyone involved had decided Dan Keith's guilt before he had even entered the courtroom. There were mobs outside the courthouse, and things weren't too different inside. None of the 15 witnesses had actually seen Keith commit a crime. Their testimonies sounded rehearsed and fabricated, and a man in McDowell County had already been convicted of Alice Ellis' murder. The jury took 30 minutes to find Keith guilty. In his statement, Dan said, "To those who say I killed anybody are liars. Each of you will be haunted every day for the rest of your life. Then the devil will have you." A few months later, Daniel Keith was hanged for the murder. When Sheriff Walker entered Dan's cell on the morning of the execution, the man again cursed those responsible, saying, "The soul of an innocent man shall not rest, Sheriff." At 1 p.m., he was hanged. In the days following the execution, a peculiar stain appeared on the south wall of the jailhouse. It resembled a hanged man. The townspeople rumored that Dan Keith was making good on his haunting threat. Every day, more and more people gathered to see the stain, which was even visible in the dark of night. The sheriff wasn't impressed by the stain. He sent some men out to clean the wall, but the stain remained. He had the wall painted, but the stain returned. Finally, ivy was planted to cover the image. The jailhouse was later moved to another building. The building was converted to office spaces, and several coats of paint were applied to the exterior. Finally, the stain was eliminated. In the 1970s, the building was demolished, and a restaurant built on the site. Several businesses have operated in the building, but none of them have lasted very long before going out of business. Even the Daniel Keith video store, which sold pizza and ice cream, along with movie rentals. We'll return with another volume about courthouses, jails, and town halls, and other government buildings in Season 2. This episode was researched and written by Jeff Cochran. and was produced and hosted by me, Dan Sellers. You can find more information on Jeff's work at adarkerworld.com, and you can find everything we're up to at our company at wreakhavocproductions.com. You can find Carolina Haints on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Every single review helps. And while you may be in the helpful mood, please consider contributing to this show and our other endeavors on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com, that's patreon.com/wreakhavoc, and find out how you can be a part of this show, as well as the Wreak Havoc Film Buffs podcast, and how to get involved as a producer on our next film. Just go to patreon.com/wreakhavoc. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our last episode of the season. Tune in then to hear more about the things that go bump in the night.